The stars stretched endlessly across the black ocean of space, cold, silent, and infinite, like ancient watchers who had seen everything yet spoken nothing. In that endless dark, Earth floated quietly, a single blue and green world wrapped in layers of silence. It had been decades since any human signal had reached the stars. Decades since the last ship left its orbit to speak to the rest of the galaxy. The alien empires, scattered like glittering thrones across the void, began to laugh in their shining council halls. They said Earth had fallen. They said humanity had given up. They called the blue world a silent rock and a forgotten child of the stars. And the laughter grew, echoing through the great glass domes and silver towers where alien rulers gathered in comfort, believing the silence was weakness. No one looked deep enough. No one listened carefully to the soft breathing of a world that had chosen to go quiet. Because Earth's silence was not death, it was patience. It was stillness before a storm that no alien mind could imagine. Beneath the calm oceans of Earth, under cities buried in ice and rock, something slept. Old machines, built when humans had walked among the stars like fire in the dark, rested in vaults that had not opened for half a century. Massive warships were frozen inside hidden hangars under the Martian crust, their black hulls covered with dust and time. A web of silent satellites circled the planet like ancient guardians, cold and unseen by any foreign sensors. They were blind to the galaxy, but not deaf. They had been listening all this time. The mocking broadcasts from the Galactic Council chambers were picked up like whispers in the dark. The laughter of alien empires reached every silent satellite, bouncing into the deep core of machines that remembered war, that remembered fire, that remembered Earth's voice when it was feared across the stars. They remembered the last great message of the Terran High Command, a message carved in steel and code. We do not vanish. We wait. On the edges of the galaxy, in the high golden tower of the Galactic Council, the laughter was loud. Alien delegates with long spines and glowing eyes mocked the human race like children mocking an empty house. They were loud once, one alien whispered, its tongue flicking like a serpent's. They built ships. They talked like gods. They thought they were strong. Another delegate, its blue-scaled skin catching the light, leaned forward and said, "And now?" Silence, not even a whisper. Earth is a ghost world. Their kind is gone. Let the silence be their monument. The room filled with low chuckles, deep hisses, and soft trills from dozens of species who once feared humanity's iron fleets. To them, Earth was no longer a threat. To them, silence meant surrender. But far away, deep beneath the cold crust of the moon, a single sensor blinked. It was old, older than most of the empires that mocked Earth now. A small pulse moved through a hidden cable, waking other machines. In the dark corridors of an underground station buried beneath layers of rock and lead, dim red lights flickered alive one by one, as if the Earth itself had taken a breath after a long sleep. Computers sealed for decades hummed softly, their code whispering like ancient voices. They didn't speak to the stars, not yet. They spoke to each other in quiet rhythms, the language of steel and power. A signal spread down into deep vaults, where the old Terran defense grid had waited like a predator hiding in tall grass. Above, the night sky over Earth was clear. Billions of people had lived their lives without ever knowing the truth. They thought the silence meant isolation, retreat, survival in peace. But beneath their feet their world was watching, listening, waiting. In a bunker hidden under the Himalayas, a group of silent soldiers sat around a black screen that had just lit up after 23 years of darkness. An old man with silver hair and a scar across his left eye stared at the screen with a look of quiet fury. He had been young when the last war ended, when Earth sealed its doors to the galaxy. Now, with trembling hands, he whispered, "It begins." In orbit, satellites long thought dead began to glow faintly, like stars blinking awake. They shifted position, aligning into formations no alien sensor network could detect. A ring of dark technology, old Terran technology, the kind the galaxy still feared in its bedtime stories, rose like a shadow around the planet. One by one, hidden stations under the ocean, inside mountains and in abandoned cities began to open their iron doors. Mechanical sounds filled the dark as air rushed into long sealed hangars. Ships sat quietly, their black hulls reflecting no light, their engines cold but waiting. It was not the fleet of a dying world. It was the fleet of a hunter that had chosen not to show its claws. The Galactic Council's transmissions continued. Alien broadcasters laughed louder, mocking Earth as entertainment. Across the Empire clusters, young alien children were shown images of Earth and told stories about how the humans had burned themselves out, how they once roared but ended in silence. But the humans were listening. Every word, every joke, every insult was recorded, stored, analyzed, measured. They were being studied like prey marked their hunters. They had no idea that they were feeding a sleeping storm with every laugh. The sky above Earth was beautiful that night. Stars burned bright, the moon was calm, the air still. In the silence, no one heard the soft rumble beneath the crust. The old Terran command bunkers, buried deep under layers of reinforced metal, began to release their locks. A low hum traveled through the ground, like a giant heartbeat that had been paused for too long. Generators that hadn't been touched for decades roared to life. Underground monitors lit up with glowing blue maps of the galaxy, ancient tactical networks that once guided entire armadas. Names of fleets long erased from the Galactic Registry began to appear on the screen. Iron Dawn, Silent Wing, Ghost Armada, Leviathan Command. These were fleets the galaxy had tried to forget, but Earth never forgot. At the edge of the solar system, far beyond Pluto's frozen orbit, a massive structure floated in darkness. To alien scanners, it was just a dead rock, but beneath its black shell lay an entire warforge, silent and patient. The awakening signal reached it like a heartbeat. One by one, thousands of lights came alive along its hidden surface. Internal reactors, sleeping since the last Great War, growled awake. The forge had not been built to defend. It had been built to end wars before they began. And tonight, it opened its eyes again. On the Council's homeworld, alien advisors were busy with politics, trade agreements, border disputes. None of them cared about Earth. None of them noticed the soft distortion at the edges of their long-range scanners. A small, nearly invisible pulse had moved through the dark, something old and dangerous, something they had no name for anymore. One advisor, an older alien with deep crimson skin, frowned at a flickering light on a control screen. It was brief, just a spark, then gone. Probably noise, the technician muttered. The advisor turned away. That moment would be remembered later, not as noise, but as the first sign that the storm was rising. In the old archives of the Galactic War, there were stories told in whispers. Stories about the last time humanity spoke. Back then, the Council had insulted Earth. The humans didn't shout back. They didn't send warnings. They went silent, and then, one night, a fleet larger than any the galaxy had ever seen appeared in the sky above 10 alien homeworlds at once. No warning, no light, just black steel and cold precision. They did not speak. They acted, and the galaxy broke. The archives buried that story. But the machines of Earth never forgot. Under the icy surface of Europa, a base deep in the dark ocean flickered alive. It had been built to be invisible, wrapped in a field no alien ship could detect. Inside its metal heart, human officers stood in silence as massive holographic displays showed hundreds of awakening signals across the solar system. "How long do we have?" one young officer whispered. The old commander smiled, a grim, quiet smile. "We're already too late to stop it. The silence is ending." The stars above Earth no longer seemed cold. They seemed to lean closer as if they too felt the shift. The galaxy had laughed for too long. It had called Earth a ghost, a weak voice, a silent world. But silence was never weakness for humans. It was a weapon. It was the sound a blade makes before it strikes. It was the still air before the storm destroys everything in its path. Humanity had chosen to wait in the shadows, to let the galaxy grow fat and comfortable. Now, the night was over. On Mars, old soldiers walked out of their underground barracks. Their faces were older, but their eyes were sharp. They had sworn oaths long ago, oaths that the galaxy thought had died with time. They looked up at the stars and saw them not as distant lights, but as hunting grounds. Somewhere deep inside, every human who had once feared being forgotten felt a pulse, a quiet whisper that said, "We are not done." Above Earth, hidden stations shifted their orbit, forming patterns no alien mind had ever solved. The planetary defense grid, once a sleeping skeleton, rose like a beast stretching its limbs. Power surged through old reactors. Codes that hadn't been spoken in half a century echoed through the command channels. Ships named after storms and legends blinked online. Captains long trained in silence took their seats. They didn't need speeches. They didn't need music. The silence itself was their signal. And as the first Terran transmission reached the far edges of the galaxy, every alien sensor shivered. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a threat. It was a sound. A deep, slow pulse like the heartbeat of something colossal and awake. In that single moment, laughter in council halls faltered. Conversation stopped. The oldest alien among them whispered, trembling, "They're awake." Humanity had not disappeared. Humanity had been listening, watching, waiting. And now the silence was no longer empty. It was alive, breathing, hunting. The storm was coming, and the galaxy had no idea how close it already was. In the great shining chamber of the Galactic Council, light poured down from tall crystal pillars, reflecting on walls built from metals mined on forgotten worlds. And in that golden glow sat the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The rulers who decided who would rise and who would fall. Their voices were sharp, proud, and full of arrogance. And tonight their words were not about war, trade, or peace. They were about Earth, the one world they all loved to mock. The one name that made them laugh as if it were a child's story told around fires. Their laughter echoed across the high ceiling like rolling thunder. Every species adding their own flavor of cruelty to the chorus. And it was not the laughter of fear. It was the laughter of those who believed they were safe, untouchable, far from any storm that could reach them. A mocking sound that wrapped the chamber in false confidence and warm arrogance. They called Earth the forgotten rock. They called humanity a lost voice. And they said the blue world had grown soft and small, unworthy of power or respect. They believed the silence of Earth was surrender. And that belief was their greatest mistake. An insectoid delegate with a dozen thin arms tapped its claw against the round table, its mandibles clicking like knives against glass. "Once they stood among us," it hissed, "but now they crawl in their caves. They are ghosts." And a reptilian lord with golden scales leaned forward, its forked tongue slipping out between fanged teeth as it laughed. "The Terrans barked once, but dogs without teeth don't bite." Another delegate, soft-skinned and long-necked, raised its hand like a performer and projected an old Earth transmission onto the air. The hologram flickered, showing a human speech from centuries ago when humanity stood proud and strong in the stars. The image of a human commander saying, "We will not kneel," echoed through the chamber. But now the aliens laughed at it. They played it like a toy, rewound it, twisted the words into songs of mockery. Entire tables laughed, their long alien fingers drumming against polished stone. Some even threw their old military reports of human victories into the air like meaningless dust. To them, it was a show, entertainment, a joke about a people who once tried to stand tall and were now silent. In the far back of the chamber, high on the balcony meant for observers, a shadowed figure didn't join the laughter. Its eyes were black and old, an ambassador of a race that once saw Terran fleets up close. Its hands shook slightly as the laughter grew louder, because unlike the others, it remembered what silence had meant the last time humanity had gone quiet. It remembered ships appearing out of nowhere, cities turned to glass, the silence that had carried a blade behind it. But the others didn't remember or didn't want to. Their arrogance was too loud, too bright, too blinding. And as their cruel jokes reached their peak, as their laughter spread like wildfire, far away in a cold and dark corner of the galaxy, someone was listening. Under the frozen crust of Europa, inside the deep hidden human base, the sound of alien laughter reached the ears of silent officers through encrypted frequency channels. The walls of the base were thick, made of black metal, older than most galactic empires. The lights inside were dim, glowing like coals in a cold furnace. In the command room sat men and women who had trained their entire lives for a day that was never supposed to come. They had learned to live in the quiet. They had learned to fight in shadows. They had learned the art of waiting. For this was not a new war for humanity. It was a promise buried under ice and time. And when the words of the alien council played through the speakers, their faces remained cold. No one smiled, no one laughed. They only listened, their hearts beating slowly in sync with the humming machines around them. At the center of the room, the old commander, a man with a deep scar across his jaw, leaned forward with both hands pressed against the table, his gray eyes fixed on the flickering screen, where alien faces laughed and joked about Earth. His voice came out low and steady like the slow grinding of stone. "They think the silence is weakness," he whispered, and the young officers around him straightened their backs. The sound of their boots shifting on the metal floor echoed softly. "They think we are gone," he added, "but they've forgotten what silence means to us." His finger tapped a small round button. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a signal, a single heartbeat sent into the black void between stars. It wasn't a message in language, it wasn't sound. It was a frequency, old and deep, the kind the galaxy's machines still recognized even if their rulers had forgotten its meaning. The signal moved through the darkness like a spark sliding through oil, invisible to alien eyes, untraceable by their proud technology. It passed through asteroid belts and empty space, through frozen moons and dust clouds, reaching long-forgotten nodes buried under space rock, reaching abandoned listening stations that had not spoken a word in half a century. Each one felt the pulse like a hand tapping on their sleeping shoulder, and one by one, they woke up. On the dark side of the moon, a single satellite blinked, then 100 followed, forming patterns in the shadows, silent formations that no alien fleet could see. Their circuits recognized the old frequency like a heartbeat they'd waited to hear again. They began whispering to each other across encrypted bands older than the Galactic Council itself. Their voices not human or alien but mechanical, cold, precise, and patient. Back in the council chamber, the mockery reached its peak. Delegates were pounding on the table with laughter, projecting old Terran defeat footage, images of burning cities twisted into jokes and comedy. But none of them knew that in that exact moment, their words had reached not just human ears, but the sleeping war machines of a world they had dared to insult. The silence they mocked was now listening carefully. In the Europa base, the commander watched the timer on the wall count down from 60 seconds. His hands never shaking, his breath slow, steady, like a predator waiting in tall grass. When the counter reached 0, the hum of the base changed. It was deep, heavy, like the first tremor before an earthquake, and every human in that room knew what it meant. The silence was beginning to shift. One of the young officers turned his head, his voice quiet but sharp. "Sir, once this starts, we can't go back." And the commander slowly raised his head, the cold light of the monitors reflecting in his eyes. "We were never going back," he said, his voice steady like stone. They laughed at the silence. Now they'll hear what it really means. At that exact moment, the signal expanded, jumping from the edges of the solar system to deep void channels known only to Terran code. And across the galaxy, where alien children still laughed at the old Terran myths, the heartbeat of Earth was felt like a chill down the spine of the void. In a corner of the Galactic Council chamber, the old ambassador who remembered Terran wars suddenly stopped breathing, his hands clutching the rail because he felt it too. Though the others didn't notice, the pulse was subtle, deep, but for those who had once faced humanity's silence, it was unmistakable. It was the sound of a storm that did not announce itself with thunder. It was the cold calm before it strikes. The laughter in the hall still rolled, but far away, under alien stars. Satellites shifted, stations blinked. Black ships began to stir, and deep in Europa's frozen tunnels, humanity had stopped being silent, not with words, but with movement. The galaxy had mocked Earth for too long, and now the storm was waking up, quiet and patient, just as it always had, deep in the void beyond Mars, where no alien patrols ever ventured and where darkness had its own heartbeat. The signal spread like wildfire through old Terran veins, silent pathways carved into the stars long before the Council's arrogance began. And one by one, ancient systems that had slept through decades of cold space began to hum, faint at first, like the low breath of a giant opening its eyes, then stronger, like drums rising from beneath the earth. The awakening started with a single spark. But humanity had never relied on one. They had prepared for this moment through centuries of silence, and now that the world had mocked them, the storm that had waited in the shadows finally moved. In a forgotten orbit around Mars, an enormous hangar that had been sealed under iron gates began to shake. Layers of dust and frozen debris fell away as thick steel doors unlocked for the first time in 50 years. The floor trembled as reactors lit up one by one, flooding the hollow darkness with the soft red glow of awakening power. And inside that hangar, a fleet slept. A fleet the galaxy had convinced itself no longer existed. The Terran Ghost Armada, black ships forged with no names. Built not to be seen but to end wars before they began. Their hulls absorbed light, their shapes blended with the void, like predators made from the darkness itself. Control rooms buried beneath layers of reinforced metal began to flicker to life. Old human crews who had trained in silence rose from their chairs without a word, their faces calm and hard. They were the descendants of the soldiers who had vanished from the galaxy's map when Earth withdrew. They were the shadows the Council forgot. But shadows don't forget. They remember everything, and as alarms pulsed in slow red light, the hum of engines long dead returned, deep, thunderous, and hungry. One officer ran his hand across a control panel that had been untouched since his father's time. And as the old interface recognized human blood and heartbeat, the ship's AI spoke for the first time in decades, its voice cold and steady. Terran Fleet Command. Reactivation confirmed. Outside the hangar, the black-armored Leviathans began to rise, weightless yet heavy, silent yet terrifying, their engines flaring with a pale blue fire that cut through the darkness like ghostlight. The galaxy had laughed at silence. Now it was hearing its echo. Far beneath Earth's oceans, another network came alive, an entire fleet hidden inside a massive sea trench, buried under silt, camouflaged for a day the world prayed would never come. Their shapes were sleek and cruel, designed to strike from nowhere and disappear before the enemy knew what hit them. And as the signal pulsed through the command grid, pressure doors cracked open, letting dark water spill across steel hulls. The ships lifted with slow, graceful movement like sleeping beasts rising to the surface. Their engines glowed beneath the black water like deep-sea predators preparing to hunt. In old bunkers across continents, old veterans put on their uniforms again, their hands steady even though their hair had turned gray, because they knew this silence better than anyone else. They had built it, shaped it, lived with it, and now the time to break it had come. On Europa's command base, the screens filled with fleet activation signals from dozens of hidden sites. Mars, Earth, Luna, Titan, Neptune's orbit, and even beyond. In the void fields near the Oort cloud, where alien sensors couldn't reach, entire armadas flickered into existence like phantoms, their presence invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. A perfect storm rising without a sound. The commander stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved from iron. "How long?" an officer asked, his voice tight. The commander didn't turn. His gaze locked on the blooming red dots on the holomap. "They're already moving," he replied quietly, "and when the galaxy sees them, it will already be too late." In the black of space, near Neptune, one of the old war engines stirred. A colossal ship called Leviathan Prime, a vessel built during the Silent War era, so massive that alien fleets had once sworn it was a myth. Its hull was blacker than the void around it, built with technology the Council once begged to copy. Its engines whispered nothing, no noise, no light, just the subtle distortion of reality itself. And when its systems came alive, hundreds of smaller vessels around it followed, forming a silent formation, a pack of wolves emerging from fog. Each ship activated under strict protocol. No transmissions, no chatter, no mistakes. This wasn't an army waking in chaos. This was a blade being unsheathed. All across the solar system, humans who had spent their lives under the illusion of peace looked up at the sky without knowing why they felt a shift in their bones. The world didn't roar. It didn't flash. It simply exhaled, a deep, heavy breath that only the galaxy would hear. And light years away, in Council-controlled space, deep-range scanners belonging to arrogant alien fleets picked up faint anomalies, just flickers, like something moving beneath the surface of water. Too fast to track, too organized to be chaos. Technicians brushed it off as background noise, but one old alien in a forgotten station froze. His eyes wide as his screens danced with faint Terran code signatures. "Impossible," he whispered. "They're gone." They were gone. The Galactic Council didn't know that when Earth went silent, it did not die. It sharpened itself. It forged its weapons in darkness. It taught its people to listen. Not speak to strike, not warn. Every insult, every mockery had been heard, and with every word the storm sharpened its edge. Now that the silence was breaking, the galaxy didn't hear human voices rising. It heard the weight of a fleet moving through the void with the precision of a predator closing its jaws. In the cold between stars, Terran fleet markers began appearing on encrypted human channels. Ghost Armada, Silent Wing, Iron Dawn, Leviathan Prime, and the names themselves carried weight like forgotten thunder. Commanders climbed into their chairs as if they'd never left. Systems linked to their neural implants with familiar ease. And for the first time in 50 years, Terran War Command was awake. The commander on Europa watched the map as ships formed strike groups without a single spoken order. This was not the beginning of war, this was the end of waiting. At the edge of alien space, one outpost detected a faint shadow, then another, then hundreds. And by the time they realized these were not echoes but warships, it was already too late to send a warning. Humanity had never relied on noise. They were hunters who killed in silence, and now the quiet was moving toward the council like a wave with no mercy. The laughter that had filled their golden chamber had awakened something they would never be able to silence again. Humanity had been patient, humanity had prepared, and now the galaxy would finally learn what Earth's silence had been hiding. In the heart of alien space, where the Galactic Council held its throne, panic moved like a silent wave beneath the polished floors and golden walls of their great chamber. At first it was only a whisper, a strange reading on distant scanners, a flicker of movement in the deep void where nothing was supposed to exist. But soon the whispers grew louder, spreading through command rooms and war stations like a storm that no one wanted to name. Technicians leaned over glowing screens with confused faces as fleets they had never seen before appeared for seconds and then vanished again, dark shapes slipping through their sensor grids like ghosts. No signature, no transmissions, no warnings, only silent shadows that left behind one clear truth. Something was coming, something big, something they had forgotten to fear. And for the first time in decades, the council hall, once filled with mocking laughter, felt colder. On the central floor, alien generals and admirals shouted orders in their strange languages, their voices sharp and nervous. They were trying to make sense of the chaos, trying to prove it was nothing more than glitches or space echoes. But deep inside, they knew it wasn't. Old stories whispered among soldiers started coming back. Stories of the Terran fleets that had moved without light, of wars fought in silence, of planets falling before anyone heard the first shot. The legends they had laughed at now crawled out of memory like ghosts from a grave. And those who had seen it before, the very few old aliens who had survived the last war with humanity, began to shake in silence, their faces pale, their hands cold. The head of the sensor network, a tall insectoid creature with burning orange eyes, stared at the incoming data and whispered in a dry, trembling voice, "This is Terran movement. This is their silence." In orbit above the Council world, fleets from dozens of empires began to rearrange themselves in confusion. Thousands of shining alien warships forming shaky defensive lines, their commanders shouting for clear positions. But the screens kept showing them nothing, only gaps in space, only darkness. Because the Terran fleets didn't roar like theirs. They didn't come with parades of light. They came like predators stalking prey in the night, moving through the black corridors of space with perfect precision, appearing on one side and vanishing the next, surrounding targets before anyone knew they were there. A nervous alien officer slammed his hand against the console, shouting, "Why can't we see them? Where are they?" But the systems offered no answer. There was nothing to see. And yet everyone in that room could feel it. Something massive was closing in. In a shadowed meeting room high above the council floor, the most powerful rulers of the galaxy gathered in emergency session. Their usual calm gone, their voices low, fast, uncertain. The arrogance they wore like armor had cracked under the weight of something they didn't fully understand. A scaled emperor with silver eyes pounded the table, his claws leaving deep marks on the metal. "This is a bluff," he hissed. "Earth has nothing left. They've been silent for decades." But an older voice rose from the far end of the room, the old ambassador who remembered the last time the humans broke their silence. His voice rough, shaking with a truth that tasted like blood. That silence is the storm, and it never comes half-hearted, he said slowly. When they stop speaking, they're not retreating. They're positioning across the galaxy. The Terran fleets were already moving like a black tide, their routes invisible to alien intelligence, their communications buried under layers of ancient encryption that no empire had ever cracked. They slipped between borders like shadows through smoke, bypassing every listening station, ignoring every patrol. They didn't send demands. They didn't send ultimatums. They didn't even send warnings. They just advanced. Alien ships at the edge of Council space caught glimpses, a shape the size of a city appearing behind them without sound, a cold blue light flashing once, then all their systems dying at once. Entire fleets vanished from scanners without firing a single shot. Panic spread through the alien ranks as commanders screamed over their comms, calling for backup, but by the time the words left their mouths, their ships were already gone. In the Council War Command Center, screens began to light up red, alert after alert, emergency signals blinking like angry stars. Fleets lost contact. Planets reported strange shadows in orbit. Defense grids failed without explanation. No battles were happening, and yet they were losing control, losing their confidence, losing their breath. The chair of the Military Council turned slowly to the central screen, where a vast sector map glowed with thousands of alien defense points. And in the black between those points, small red shadows spread like cracks in glass. No noise, no sound, only the creeping shape of something inevitable. How many ships? She whispered. We don't know, someone answered, but it's everywhere. On Europa, far away from their panic, the Terran commander watched everything with steady eyes, his hands folded behind his back as the holomap showed the alien defenses scrambling. They never learned, he said quietly to his officers. They thought silence meant defeat. The young officer standing beside him asked, Sir, when will they realize? The commander smirked faintly, a cold, calm smile that didn't reach his eyes. When it's already over. Back in the council chamber, one alien general finally shouted what everyone feared to admit. They are surrounding us. And the room fell silent, the same silence they once mocked. That silence now hung over their golden hall like a knife pressed against their throats. The laughing galaxy that once called Earth weak now looked into the void and saw nothing. Nothing except the slow, unstoppable movement of a power they had forgotten, a predator they thought had vanished. The panic had only just begun, and they still didn't know that the fleet surrounding them was only the beginning of humanity's reply. In the cold orbit surrounding the Council's homeworld, the night was still, a silence so deep that even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Then a single ripple moved across the black, soft and silent like a shadow stretching its claws. And without any warning, without light, without fanfare, a Terran cruiser appeared out of the void, blacker than the night around it, its surface absorbing every photon, its shape smooth, long, and quiet like a predator built to hunt in darkness. Alien radar did not detect its arrival. Alien fleets did not see it approach. It was simply there, as if it had always been there, waiting. Its engines emitted no noise, no flare, only a soft pulse like the beating of a hidden heart. On the council station below, alarms suddenly screamed to life. But by the time alien technicians looked up, the cruiser had already moved closer, massive, silent, casting a cold shadow across their golden station. The alien commanders rushed to their control decks, shouting in their strange languages, the panic spreading faster than fire in dry grass. Fleet after fleet scrambled to form defensive walls. But their formation was shaking, their sensors confused, their systems showing them nothing but interference. The Terran ship floated just beyond their reach, a dark shape wrapped in the deep silence that had once made the galaxy laugh. But now it made them tremble. One young alien officer, his hands shaking over glowing controls, screamed, "Lock weapons on it!" And the system answered with a chilling message. Target not found. It was there, but it wasn't. A ghost wearing the skin of a warship. In the council chamber, delegates stared at the live feed in stunned silence. The same faces that had once laughed at Earth's weakness now reflected the black hull of a ship they could not touch. On the bridge of the Terran cruiser, the crew was calm, their movements precise. No shouting, no rush, only the quiet discipline of hunters who had waited for this moment their entire lives. The captain stood in the center, wearing the black uniform of the Ghost Armada. His face still, his eyes sharp. Before him hovered a holographic projection of the entire Council world. Its fleets, its defenses, its pulse. "Engage Protocol Zero," he said softly. Not loud, not like someone giving a threat, but like someone stating a fact, and the ship obeyed like a living thing. The entire hull vibrated with a sound too low to be heard by the alien ears. Then the signal went out. One short, cold pulse, like a heartbeat across the void. In that instant, hundreds of alien warships surrounding the Council world flickered, their lights dying as if the stars themselves were being swallowed. Engines failed, shields collapsed, their weapon systems went blind. Their targeting arrays shattered under an invisible code that crawled through their machines like a virus. The Terrans didn't fire a single shot. They simply turned the galaxy's pride into floating, helpless metal. Ships that once roared with power now drifted silently, powerless, terrified. In the Council war room, alarms overlapped with frantic voices as officers shouted over one another, their hands pounding controls. "We've lost control of the grid." One screamed, "Weapons are offline." Another shouted, "Shields aren't responding." A third voice cried, "It's them. It's Earth. It's the Terrans." Above their world, the black cruiser remained perfectly still, like a blade hanging over a neck. From the shadows of distant stars, more ships appeared, first a dozen, then hundreds, each one sliding into orbit without sound. Their formation perfect, their arrival synchronized down to the heartbeat. They surrounded the Council world with quiet precision. Not a single warning, not a single broadcast. Their silence was louder than any threat the galaxy had ever known. An alien admiral stood frozen in the observation deck, his wide eyes reflecting the Terran fleet that now stretched across the sky like a wall of black steel. "We can't even see their engines," he whispered. "We can't even fight." In the Council chamber, leaders rose from their seats, their faces pale. Their arrogance burned away by fear. They had mocked the silence, but now they stood inside it, feeling it press against their skin like cold iron. Some shouted to open communication channels. Others screamed to fire what was left of their defenses. But the truth was carved into their screens. They were blind, their fleets were mute. Their weapons were toys against something built in the dark while they laughed. The Terran cruiser drifted closer, slow and deliberate, as if to remind them that Earth did not need to speak to make the galaxy kneel. Then, for the first time in decades, the Terrans spoke, not with a fleet's roar, not with threats, but with a single message broadcast in a frequency older than the Council itself. A calm, clear human voice echoed across every alien communication line. "Your weapons belong to us now," the voice said softly, steady as the void itself. "Your skies belong to us, your silence belongs to us." The alien leaders froze, their blood cold, for in that moment, they understood. The silence was not weakness. It was a blade sharpened over years of waiting, and they were now trapped inside its edge, outside. The Black Fleet positioned itself in perfect orbit, their guns still silent, their engines barely glowing, and yet the weight of their presence crushed the Council world like a storm pressing down on glass. And across the galaxy, alien civilizations listening to the broadcast trembled, because they too knew what this meant. Earth hadn't just returned, Earth had never left. It had only waited for the moment when laughter turned into fear. What began with mockery had ended with silence swallowing an entire world, and as the cruisers aligned their guns in silence, the galaxy finally saw Earth not as a forgotten world, but as the storm it should have never provoked. The Council world was wrapped in a thick layer of fear, the kind that pressed down on the air and made every breath feel heavy. Outside its glowing towers and golden sky lanes, the Terran fleet stood in perfect silence. Hundreds of black warships stretching across the orbit like a wall of steel. Their engines cold, their lights dark, their presence alone strong enough to crush any will to fight. Alien admirals watched the black shapes drift across their sensors like the outline of a storm that had already decided their fate. And inside the Council war room, the commanders who once laughed at Earth were now shouting at dead consoles, trying to bring their weapons back online, their voices breaking under the weight of something they had never experienced before. True helplessness. No alarms could save them now. No emergency plan could rewrite what they were seeing with their own eyes. Alien fleets hung in orbit like broken teeth. Hundreds of ships floating powerless. Their reactors hijacked, their targeting systems silenced, their defenses stripped away by a single pulse from the Terran flagship. What they had built for centuries was undone in minutes. Some tried to broadcast distress calls, but the frequencies were locked. Their own systems refused to obey. Everything they controlled now belonged to someone else. To the silent enemy they thought was weak. In the council chamber, the delegates stared at the main holodisplay showing the orbit. The black Terran formation surrounding their world like a cage. Each ship perfectly positioned, not moving, not speaking, but carrying the weight of thousands of years of human fury that had been buried under patience. Among them sat the old ambassador who had lived through the last Terran war, his voice shaking as he whispered what the others didn't want to hear. "They're not here to talk," he said, his words crawling like cold wind. "They're here to show us what silence means." But the others, blinded by years of arrogance, couldn't understand. They begged for someone to open communications. They begged to surrender before the battle even began. But there was no battle to surrender from. The Terrans had already won before firing a single shot. In the highest tower, the council leader, a tall being with golden skin and silver eyes, stood staring out of a massive glass wall, watching as the first Terran dreadnought drifted closer, its size so enormous that it blocked out half of the sky, its hull black and quiet like a god carved from the void. And in that moment, the leader finally understood what the silence had always been. It was not weakness, it was waiting. In the Terran command room aboard the Leviathan flagship, the atmosphere was the opposite of the panic below. Everything was calm, smooth. Like a well-rehearsed dance, officers moved in silence, their eyes locked on glowing panels as the fleet surrounded the council planet with perfect precision. The commander stood in the center with hands clasped behind his back, his voice quiet as he said, "Status." One of the officers replied without hesitation, "All systems under control. Alien fleets remain neutralized. Orbital grid secured. Their planet is surrounded, sir." The commander didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply nodded slowly. The victory had been written long before this day. This was the moment Earth had built in its silence. The council tried to respond, tried to call other empires for help, but their calls bounced into the void. Every channel was silent. Because the Terrans had blocked their entire network, every frequency locked under human control. The same network that had once mocked Earth now carried their enemy's quiet grip. And beyond this world, on distant colonies and trade stations, news spread like fire. Every empire watching the live feeds of the Black Fleet surrounding the council world. Every leader who had once laughed at the blue planet now watched with wide, fearful eyes, realizing that the storm they mocked had grown in the dark. On the ground, civilians filled the streets, staring up at the sky where alien fleets once stood proud, and now only Terran ships hung like silent executioners. There was no light, no message, only the pressure of their presence, and it was more terrifying than any weapon. The Council's military leaders made one final, desperate order: launch the planetary defense grid. But the moment they pressed the command, the system responded with a single line of text: System command transferred, Terra. Their own planet no longer belonged to them. Inside the Terran flagship, the commander turned to his communication officer. "Open channel," he ordered, and across the planet, across every military base, council chamber, warship, and home, a single voice filled the air, deep calm, unshaken. "For decades you mocked our silence," the voice said, steady like a blade being unsheathed. "You believed silence meant weakness, but silence was the weapon we forged in the dark. Silence was the time we gave you to forget, and now silence is what will end you." The alien leaders froze, their pride crumbling like ash, for they could hear no threat in the voice, no hatred, just certainty. Every Terran ship lowered its weapons in perfect formation, not out of mercy, but because they didn't need to fire. They had already taken everything: power, control, sky, and hope. The galaxy watched as the strongest world in the known stars stood helpless before a fleet that had returned from the shadows. And as the black warships cast their massive shadows across alien cities, the people below whispered the same name they once mocked: Earth. The silence that hung over the Council world that night was different. It wasn't the silence of Earth anymore. It was the silence of the galaxy itself. The silence of fear. The silence that comes when a predator has wrapped its jaws around its prey and is waiting for it to finally understand who holds its life. The Council had mocked Earth's quiet, and now that same quiet had become the sound of their end. The Council world was drowning in a silence it had never known before. Not the calm silence of night or the soft silence of peace, but the crushing, suffocating silence of total defeat. Outside their atmosphere, the Terran fleet hung like a black crown around the planet. Endless warships stretching across the stars with perfect, merciless symmetry, no banners, no noise, no flashing warnings, only cold steel and shadows. The alien leaders who once laughed at Earth's quiet now stood beneath it, staring at the sky through the great glass windows of their golden towers. And for the first time in their proud history, they understood what that silence really meant. It was not absence. It was dominance. It was the sound of a storm that didn't need to roar to make the world kneel. Inside the Council chamber, chaos had burned itself out. The shouting had stopped. The fear had spread so deep that even voices dared not rise. Leaders sat stiff in their seats, their eyes hollow. The floor littered with broken data pads and crushed pride. None of their fleets had survived the first wave of silence. None of their weapons could resist a signal they didn't even understand. And now their entire world hung in the hands of an enemy they had mocked for generations. An enemy that had never needed to fire a shot to win, because it had spent decades turning its silence into a weapon sharper than any blade. The Council leader stood at the center of the room, his golden skin dull under the cold light of defeat. His voice trembling as he whispered, "What do we do now?" But no one answered, because no one had an answer. The great communication towers that once sent orders across the galaxy now carried only one signal, the human signal, a soft pulse that echoed like a heartbeat. Every alien world tuned in, whether they wanted to or not. The frequency cut through every defense grid, every communication line, every empire's pride. And then the voice came, the same calm, cold Terran voice that had spoken once before, now echoing like thunder in their ears. "We did not speak because we were afraid," the voice said, slow and steady. "We were silent because we were building, because we were listening, because we were waiting. And now you finally understand what silence means to us." Across the chamber, alien rulers lowered their heads, every word slicing through their arrogance like a blade through paper. They had never heard a voice so quiet and yet so final. The commander aboard the Terran flagship stood before the massive viewport, watching the golden cities below, his reflection dark against the stars. The entire Council world under his fleet's control without a single missile fired. It was exactly as it was meant to be. Earth had not returned to beg for respect. It had returned to take what was already its. The silence had been a promise, and now it was a verdict. One of his officers approached slowly, her voice calm. "Sir, all defenses are locked. Orbital control secured. The planet is completely under Terran authority." The commander nodded, his jaw set like stone. "Then it's done," he replied quietly. "They wanted to laugh at silence. Now they'll live under it." On the ground, alien civilians gathered in open streets, their eyes fixed on the night sky as the Terran ships eclipsed their stars. Generations of children had grown up hearing stories about humanity as a joke, a dying race, a myth turned into comedy. And now the Black Fleet above them erased every story with a single, unspoken truth: humanity had never been weak. Humanity had only been waiting. Every insult they threw into the void had been heard. Every laugh had been counted. And tonight the galaxy was paying for every single one. The Council leader walked slowly toward the central balcony, his hands shaking as he looked up at the Leviathan ship hovering above the planet like a god made of iron, its massive shape filling the horizon. He had thought power was noise. That strength was shown through shouting, through light and fire. But the humans had shown him something different, something far more terrifying. Power that didn't need to speak. His voice broke as he said, "Open a channel." The technicians obeyed, their hands trembling, and for the first time in centuries, the mighty Galactic Council spoke not to command, not to mock, but to beg. "Earth," the leader's voice cracked through the calm, "we surrender on the Terran flagship. The commander listened to the trembling alien voice and remained still for a long moment, the silence stretching through the stars like a knife at their throats. Then finally he leaned forward, his voice steady. "We don't need your surrender," he said, each word a hammer. "We already have your world." The transmission ended. The alien leaders fell silent, their faces pale, their world no longer theirs. And in that silence they understood the one lesson they had ignored for too long. Never mistake quiet for weakness. Never mistake stillness for defeat. Across the galaxy, other empires who had laughed along now trembled in fear, their fleets on high alert, their leaders whispering in hidden rooms. But deep down they all knew the truth. If Earth could silence the Council, it could silence anyone. No empire would stand against a power that moved like shadows and struck without light. And the name they once mocked now carried the weight of thunder. Whispered in fear in every corner of the galaxy, Earth. The Terran fleet did not celebrate, it did not need to. Victory was not loud, victory was quiet. And that was what terrified them most. Above the Council world, the black ship slowly turned away. Their formation perfect, their presence unforgettable. They had arrived like a storm, and left behind a silence that would live forever in galactic history. And as the last human cruiser disappeared into the black, the Council world remained kneeling in the dark, knowing that this silence would haunt them long after the fleet was gone.